Fox just released their first inverted fork, literally flipping a design that we've had for decades. But why have they done this? And is it going to be the future of mountain biking?
What we're seeing today is riders choosing to sacrifice a little bit of weight for a significant increase in performance.
For me, it's not going to be an everyday fork, but when you want something like that, it's pretty impressive.
Very supple. The hand fatigue was noticeably better. I'm really excited. I've only done one day on that fork, and I'm really excited to keep riding it into the future.
So with a traditional fork design, we have the small parts or the stanchions at the top, and we have the bigger part or the lower at the lower end of the fork. And with the inverted fork, it literally means it's inverted. The stanchions are now at the bottom, and the lowers are now effectively the uppers at the top. And you'll notice that the lowers now don't need a bridge. And this is where they can do a few more clever things to make it feel different. But why have they done this? And is it going to be the future of mountain biking?
Okay. I actually forgot the original question you asked me.
I have too. Okay, let's try that again.
Okay, let me think about it though. You mean what's wrong with a traditional fork?
Yeah.
Nothing. Conventional forks are a very efficient way to achieve all of the design requirements that we have for a fork. When I say design requirements, what I'm really referring to is kind of three performance aspects that we really care about, and that's control, comfort, and grip. And when trying to achieve those performance requirements, you want to do it using a structure that is both stiff and light. And conventional forks are fantastic at doing that. We wanted to explore a different balance though, and the inverted fork allowed us to do that.
So what's wrong with the traditional fork? Well, nothing really. But in theory, with the heavier part of the fork down at the bottom, which is effectively attached to the wheel and is effectively the moving part, every time you hit a small bump, it's heavier and then it's harder to actuate. So in theory, an inverted fork with the weight at the top and less at the bottom, it should be easier for the wheel to move over small bumps, therefore making it more small bump sensitive or more compliant. Did you ever have any experience with the old inverted forks, like way back when?
Yeah, but I don't want to tell you which one, because it was way back.
Going all the way back to 2010, 2011, when we experimented with this architecture for downhill. Some of the learnings from that project have gone into this fork. In fact, the engineer who was working on that project at the time is one of the engineers that helped develop this fork.
So talk about some of the common problems we had way back when that made people a little bit skeptical of inverted.
Including myself.
Yes.
Yeah. I think rigidity and weight are the two that honestly still haven't been addressed. Rigidity to a certain point, but weight's still a thing, and it's always going to be a thing.
Bikes are a human-powered machine, and so weight is a really critical component to everything we put on a bike. And this architecture is heavier than a conventional fork, not by a lot, but by a meaningful amount. But as bikes have gotten more capable, we've been able to push harder. And what we're seeing today is riders choosing to sacrifice a little bit of weight for a significant increase in performance. I think of like DH casing tires on an enduro bike or coil shock on even a trail bike. So riders are choosing to add weight where they get a benefit in performance. And certainly on e-bikes, you know, adding a couple 100 grams isn't a huge drawback.
Back in the day, old school inverted forks were pretty heavy and people were skeptical to use them. But Fox thinks that now is the perfect time to bring this fork out again. So why now? Why this now?
It's a pretty good question. I think we honestly need to look at other brands doing inverted forks and why they did them and then how they did them. And then we took quite a while to decide whether we could actually do it better. And if we couldn't do it better, there's no point in doing it. So there were a lot of prototypes and a lot of people arguing about whether we should do it or not.
And right now, for a long travel bike that's going to be ridden really hard in steep terrain, this fork is amazing. If you're concerned about weight, you know, maybe this isn't the right fork to match to your bike. There's a lot of different riding preferences out there, a lot of different bikes out there. We all ride for different reasons. We're all riding in different terrains. We want to give the customer options to find a product that matches perfectly to how they want to ride their bike.
The Podium fork was really interesting to ride. Very supple. The hand fatigue was noticeably better in back-to-back runs. And riding that Podium, I could go stiffer and stiffer and still have that like comfort and support that they're talking about in the presentation. Like that hand fatigue was just non-existent compared to what I'd been riding and what I've been used to. So I'm really excited. I've only done one day on that fork and I'm really excited to keep riding it into the future.
So what's the difference between the old stuff and now what we're doing with the Podium?
I think part of it is just manufacturing has made drastic leaps in tolerances, materials, processes. So it's allowed us to do some things that couldn't have been done. And honestly, this fork was hard to make. It took quite a bit of effort to get things to where we wanted it.
What was the difficulty?
Almost all of it. But alignment
This
of
wasn't easy.
machining the crown, getting the upper tubes, everything aligned perfectly. Part of what the Podium forks do, or a USD fork in general, is that the bushing overlap increases as it goes into travel. So this entire tube is smooth as a bushing surface.
An inverted chassis operates at lower friction when the fork is loaded, and how it produces or operates at lower friction. In an inverted chassis, we're able to get greater bushing separation compared to a conventional fork. The lower stanchion that's covered by the guards here, it can travel up into the crown. So that allows us to move this upper bushing up even farther, and that reduces the contact pressure on the bushings, which reduces the friction.
Okay, so what Bill means by making the bushings further apart is if you imagine that my hands are bushings holding onto the stanchions. Now, if my hands are close together, then it's really easy to move the fork and bend the fork with outside pressures. Say, for example, if you're going around a corner and the forces are moving your wheels. However, if you move your hands further apart, that then becomes a much more stable platform to hold the fork in place. So if you're going around corners, you can keep that rigidity much better, which means that there's less binding in the fork, less friction, and that means a smoother fork.
The best description I can give is that all you feel is the damper working. There's no weirdness of chassis stiction. There's so much less friction as it moves through travel in situations where normally you'd be on the brakes, the forks bind a little bit. Everything does. But these forks are so stiff and so smooth that hitting things under load on the brakes on steep trails, it's pretty special.
I think everyone can benefit from what that fork delivers. Like I said, the hand fatigue was just like huge. So if you're just doing like laps in Whistler Bike Park all day and your hands are like your lobster claws by the end of it, like that's gonna be a huge benefit to that rider. And then for a racer, you're gonna be less fatigued when you get to the bottom of a run. And there's so many things. It's like, because I really wanna spend more time on it to like get to know it a little bit more. And I think there's so many new ways of setting up a bike that fork will provide that like we haven't had the option to do in the past.
So who is this fork for?
Large. Yeah. Gravity oriented. And e-bikes. Anything that's got some weight behind it that is going to tax a traditional fork. But it is heavier and there's no way around that. So you have to accept the fact that you're going to be pushing more weight around. So as an everyday fork, maybe it's not everybody's cup of tea, but as a gravity fork, it's pretty good.
So Fox have been making inverted forks for some time, mainly for motocross, but they do have a background in it. So it's not a huge leap to suddenly bring out an inverted fork for mountain biking. We have been borrowing motocross technology for some time. And I guess this is Fox just bringing their knowledge of motocross to the mountain biking world. I don't think it's going to replace the standard fork. I'm certainly going to keep running a lighter version, but I love that there are now more and more options on the market, and I love that companies are starting to experiment with tech again.